This time on Poll Hub, the economy is booming. Jobs are back, unemployment is down, incomes are up, and yet a brand new poll with NPR shows Americans are thinking more about inflation than any of those other things. We'll look at the data and discuss how Biden's Build Back Better bill, there's a tongue twister, might or might not help his declining approval rate. Then, new findings on what sports fans think about women's sports. We're talking with the director of Marist Center for Sports Communication about a new poll we did with them. Interesting stuff. Finally, now that Thanksgiving is over, let's get ready for Black Friday or Cyber Monday. We're looking back in time in our fun fact segment, not too far back, to post-Turkey Day shopping. How fun is that? Stick around. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho.
And I'm Lee Miringoff.
We just completed a poll with our partners at NPR of Americans, asking them about the economy. Good time of year because we're in the time of year where we spend a lot of money, generally on various things between Thanksgiving dinners and the holiday season for all the gifts. We found one of the questions we asked is, what's the biggest concern people have about the economy? And empirically, the economy is doing very well in some ways. As we talked about, job growth, unemployment, incomes, all of these things are very positive, but that's not what Americans are focused on when we ask them about the economy, right?
Well, yeah, top of the list is inflation. And I don't know that that's so surprising. I mean, we asked a number of different concerns, and certainly, we were all seeing rising prices, and in one form or another. I think post-pandemic, supply chain problems has probably become one of the conversation topics that we've all been having. But 39% of Americans said inflation, and surprisingly, only 17% said wages, although another 11 did say labor shortages, and 10% said unemployment.
And I would just say, surprise, surprise on that. There's a difference in parties. Republicans so much more concerned about inflation at 58%, independents at 42%, Democrats at 19%. Democrats' number one plurality concern is wages. So there's the non-surprising partisan split there in terms of what people are worried about. And the economy, I thought also was interesting because the economy is now, I've seen in some polls that it is the highest problem, number one problem of all problems, now that COVID is not seen as being the number one problem. So the economy has now reasserted itself, and in a way that probably doesn't do well for the president.
Right, which is remarkable. We'll get to the president's approval rating in a minute, but it is remarkable because, again, by all empirical measures, the economy, other than inflation, which even some economists argue is not all that bad, the economy is doing amazingly well. And any other time, you would think that whoever the president was would be able to run up the score on this, but it's not happening.
Well, I think it is tough because I'm not sure that everybody is experiencing this comeback. And there's a lot of stress and concern about not only, the future, but just this transition back to normal, or whatever normal is supposed to be. So I think there's a lot of concern about the future. And if you put together wages, labor shortages, unemployment, I mean, right there, that's about the same proportion of people that are concerned about inflation. I mean, there are other issues too. There's housing costs. Where does that go? Is that housing, or is in the economy, or is that another reflection of inflation and gas prices? So I think there's a certain unsteadiness. Some of the barometers that we look at to assess the economy, although are in a positive direction, have had some fits and starts. For instance, personal income hasn't been sliding, but it hasn't exactly been, increasing dramatically either. And for many people, they're seeing stagnation around, rising prices, particularly for the things that we need to pay for, either, every day, every week, or every month. I'm thinking gas, food, and housing.
So is that, Lee, what's driving the approval rating? We have Joe Biden's approval rating at the lowest we've had it since we've been polling his presidency, at 42%, down from 44% earlier this month when we polled. Still, compared to Donald Trump's numbers, not terrible. He never got above 44%, but at the same time, 42%, not a good place to be for a president in his first term.
Yeah, and I think driving that also is not only these economic numbers you're talking about, but it's the intensity of the disapproval, where almost 3 times the number of people say they strongly disapprove of his performance as say that they strongly approve of his performance. So when you talk about the energy and the mobilization of our politics, and you talk about the 2022 midterms, I mean, these are the things that people are on the Democratic side are getting worried about, and on the Republican side are sort of hoping that the midterms come quicker. And I have a question for you guys. I mean, how much of this is, if the economy is not by most metrics doing horribly, how much of this is a messaging problem coming out of the White House? I mean, is he not driving his message home in ways he needs to?
Well, I mean, I don't think there has been a lot coming out of Washington. I mean, for the Democrats, most of what is discussed, in Washington is the bickering that they've been having among themselves. And we actually did ask a question about that, whether people think the gridlock in Washington is mostly just about the Democrats bickering among themselves, or is it really a polarization problem, a problem between Democrats and Republicans agreeing? And although much of the chatter, particularly, in the media, is about how the Democrats can't get it together, most people actually do think that gridlock in Washington is because the Democrats and Republicans are poles apart, literally and figuratively, and just can't get anything done.
So Friday, something did happen. The House passed the Build Back Better bill act, the formerly $3.5 trillion grab bag of initiatives, and now 1.75 billion. Who knows what the number is actually going to end up being, because it passed the House, but it now goes to the Senate. This is a victory, right, for Biden and Pelosi and Democrats, but it's not a finished victory. It's kind of like halftime. You're ahead at halftime. Is this the kind of thing that, with some messaging, turns things around? Again, we're only 8 months in. I'm not saying, but does this begin to turn things around, do you think, for Biden?
I would say that what is being approved in Washington and what is being proposed in Washington are both from the infrastructure and the Build Back Better bill are popular with voters, and even many Republicans like the direction of these pieces of legislation. But Joe Biden is governing with the slimmest of majorities. I mean, the Senate, everybody knows, is 50-50. And I think the House has a net 5-seat advantage for the Democrats, which is, nothing to write home about. So it's very tough. And the process seems very slow at a time when everybody wants things instantly. So I'm not so sure this took so long. It just feels that it's been such a drag out process. And as a result, the system looks broken, yet they may end up with a negotiated settlement, which passes, and in a popular piece of legislation. But will he get the credit? I don't know if it delivers that way.
Well, I mean, you talked about messaging, and I think the White House is now trying to frame all of these legislative initiatives as anti-inflation measures. Legislation that is going to, stem this tide of rising inflation and really address the issues of childcare, housing, healthcare. And it is, I mean, you're right to say that these are all things, the proposals are all very popular, but, as we like to say, the devil's in the details. And so there's a lot of debate about how it gets, how it gets paid for. The Democrats are looking, to taxes on corporations and wealthier Americans. And of course, as long as someone's not being taxed, that's usually pretty popular. I think that there's still a long way to go in terms of negotiations and a short time frame for focus on 2022.
I would focus on that long way to go, though. I think it's so easy. Our media cycle has sped up so much that, we used to talk about this during the Trump administration. It's like, oh, that was a week ago. And it was some, outrage that had outraged everybody. And we were already at two past that. I think that media cycle has not slowed down now that there's a different president in office. And I think so. I think it is worth noting that Afghanistan was the disaster that sank the presidency. I haven't heard that word spoken in quite some time. Now it's inflation. Things changed quickly. And the Wall Street Journal had a front page piece at the beginning of this week about supply chain worries being a little overstated now, things loosening up. There are plenty of economists who talk about inflation being driven largely right now by gas prices and one or two other things, all of which are likely to ease at least some as we get into next year. I mean, would it really surprise any of us if we got to June of next year, talking about 2022, and either Republicans were going to gain 80 seats or Democrats were going to gain 10 or 20? I mean, would it really surprise us in the way the news cycles have been going?
No, I totally agree with that. Barbara, you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say, we thought we'd be talking impeachment, for November 2020, and we were a very long way from that. And in the midst of a pandemic, which no one has foreseen. But look, the economy is being laid at the president's doorstep. His approval on that is the same as his approval overall, 42%. Could be coincidence, but I suspect there's a strong relationship between the two. And you did mention, Jay, that certainly Donald Trump's approval rating was never much higher than Biden's right now. But I think in terms of the intensity that Lee mentioned, there was always a significant difference. And Trump, until really he got mired in the pandemic, was often given very good marks for the economy. Midterm elections for first-term presidents are really, really hard. And so it's going to be tough to get by, historical precedents. But yeah, we don't have a crystal ball.
Yeah, I dusted off my old economics textbook from college, and there was something about supply and demand and the relationship to price and different graphs that move depending on all that stuff. And, there's some disagreement as to what is actually causing all this inflation and how much of it can be laid at the whole supply problem as a result of COVID and driving up prices. I don't know. I didn't continue in my study of economics, and
you became a political scientist instead.
Yes, because and I think probably leave it right there is probably a good place to leave it.
Well, Jane McManus is going to join us to have a conversation about women's sports. Jane is the director of the Center for Sports Communication at Marist College. She's also a professional lecturer of communication. And full disclosure, she is a partner with the Marist Poll. The center is, and we work with Jane on lots of topics to find out what Americans think about sports. And today is no different. Welcome, Jane. It's great to have you.
I'm so excited to be here and really lucky to partner with you. That's a generous way of putting it. So thank you very much.
Oh, no, we enjoy it because it gets us out of the political realm and into the sports the sports court, so to speak. And we get to use some of the same analogies, whether we're talking politics or sports. But this poll actually was of particular interest. It showed that a majority of now all sports fans say that women's sports do not get enough media coverage and that women deserve more representation as coaches and managers. And what was particularly striking is support is especially high among younger fans. Why is this so significant?
I'm going to tell this in an analogy, the way that I'm looking at this. At the NCAA tournament earlier this year, the women's tournament, there was a player in Oregon whose name was Sedona Prince. And she's the one who walked in to the workout facility for the women and noticed that it was a little triangle of dumbbells. And also noticed on social media that the men's NCAA tournament, which was being held at a different site because of COVID, had an immense ballroom that had been turned into a gym. Numerous machines, weightlifting equipment, all sorts of things. And she proposed these on social media to say, why, how is this? How is it in this day and age? You have the men's facility, which is a palace to working out, and the women's facility, which is paltry. And, she presented this as, why haven't you guys fixed this yet? Like, clearly this inequity should have been fixed. And I think that's the attitude that younger people take to this issue, to the issue of coverage of women's sports. And so when they see a question like, should there be more women coverage of women's sports? Their answer is, of course there should be. And why hasn't there been? It's from a point of, we deserve this, we've earned this, and the audience is there. And I think that these numbers that we see in this poll really backs that up, that there is the audience and the expectation is there, with 59% of sports fans saying that there should be more coverage of women's sports.
I have heard, and I don't know if this is how true this is, that for March Madness this year, that there's going to be an effort by the networks to bring about a greater equity or equality in coverage. I mean, was that just a nice headline, or do you anticipate this is going to become reality in terms of the Final Four and March Madness and all those things that just occupy all the sports space?
Yeah, that's a good question, but it's tough to tell just because if broadcast rights for the NCAA men's and women's tournaments were both owned by the same network, then you could look to see if there's parity. But ESPN does the women's tournament and CBS does the men's tournament. So there can't be a one-to-one simply because they're not being done by the same place.
Okay.
I think, there have been a number of ways now that this has come about. Just the other day, Sabrina Ionescu, who's a Liberty player, tweeted out that she was looking at all of the major sports spaces to find some women's basketball coverage, college women's basketball coverage. She played at Oregon as well. So there's something in the water there that makes women feel like they demand their equal coverage. But I think that, she was looking and saying, where is this coverage? And the truth of it is that, we looked at the demographics in this polling, right? And we find that younger people, women, and people of color are more interested in where is the coverage of women's sports. Now, that is not the dynamic and the demographic that sits in the offices at most of the major sports networks deciding what is covered and, who's broadcasting what games.
I was just going to say too, and it's a good point you're making, Jane, because we did go the extra mile, so to speak, on this poll. It was actually 2 national surveys that we asked the same questions on, so that we could drill down and look at different subgroups and understand this issue among Americans, regardless of culture, ethnicity, and gender. So didn't mean to interrupt, but did want to point out the rigor, the extra rigor that you're referring to here.
Right. And we did that exactly. We were, our side was looking just to get some numbers and do one poll. And your side was like, no, we really want to make sure that we have a really good representative sample here so that we can say this with authority. And it was so important. And it ended up being, so clear that younger people, women and people of color are interested in more coverage of women's sports. And, again, you compare that against the demographics of people at the top and the decision makers in the sports media industry, they are not the same groups.
So how much of that is chicken and egg? And what I mean by that is those white male executives in those positions say, well, the audience wants the, male sports. They want the men's sports. And when we put on women's sports, we don't get the ratings. And so we can't. I mean, it's just an economics thing. How much of that is real? How much of that is a case of if you don't do it right, the audience won't come?
How much time do we have? Because this is the quintessential.
Whatever you need, because I think this is a really, really important issue.
A 3-credit course at Marist, how's that?
Totally could be. Well, I think there are a number of different things. Number one is, who are you putting on the games for? Are you putting them on for the fans, or are you putting on for the advertisers? Because I think a lot of decisions are made at the advertising level. And at the advertising level, sports broadcasts are meant to reach audiences of men. That is who for the most part, those networks are selling to. And that is a huge factor in this that doesn't often get spoken about. But, it for me came clear when I did a radio show with two other women at ESPN Radio with Sarah Spain and Kate Fagan called The Trifecta. And one day I asked about the ratings and asked specifically about the ratings about whether or not with women we were stronger as a show. And I was told that the ratings for sports radio, they don't keep the numbers of women who are listening at all. They keep the numbers of men between 18 and 54. So if you're not even looking at that audience of women and trying to target them in any way, in any meaningful way, they're invisible to you. And so in some ways, I think the audience of women and of women's sports fans have been invisible to sports networks because that's not who they're selling to. And that's a big part of it. It has nothing to do with the interest in women's sports. Ratings actually have gone up for many women's sports. And I think, just from our polling, the idea that, and there have, of course, they were slow to catch on. It's been 20 years now since, 1997 was the first year for the WNBA. It takes a generation to build up loyalty and sports fans. So much of that is passed down generation to generation. And, it's going to games, it's having a team in your area. It's creating that loyalty among a local and geographic group of fans. And that takes time. It's not an immediate thing. So now you have and I think if you look at the national women's soccer team as well, like the U.S. women's national team has an incredible amount of popularity and actually tops the ratings when it comes to soccer, men's and women's soccer.
That's because they're better than the men's soccer. Anyway, never mind. Sorry.
Well, right, exactly. Well, and this is why this survey is so important, because we are now 50 years after Title IX next year. Next June, it will be 50 years since the passage of Title IX. Wow. And so I think that what was taken for granted, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when it came to fans and women's sports, the world has changed. The United States has changed. Sports fans have changed. There is now the expectation that women will have a place on the playing field, just like men do. And I think the audiences are arriving. And you're exactly right, Jay. What has happened is that network executives are slow to recognize that because they enjoy what they have now and it works well. So why should they shift an entire, way of looking at sports and advertising model because there's been this shift in culture?
How bored are you of the expression glass ceiling?
I think the ceiling is kept in place.
Yeah.
It is. It's a tough thing because it's presented as though something that's naturally there. Those glass ceilings are not natural formations. They are held in place by rigorous frameworks.
Or they're literally man-made.
As it were.
Exactly.
Yeah, but we've also done polling on sports viewership, which has declined.
In general, across all sports.
In general, not just with women's sports, but has been declined in general because there are also so many other ways of viewing and participating, and so it may actually be economically very feasible, insightful, and visionary for these men to look at a very, very large market of both women, young and old, who are very interested in seeing women's sports. And it needs to be promoted. It needs to be supported, just as men's sports have been in the past and built over time, as you mentioned.
Well, maybe one of the recent or new, very soon to graduate members of the Center for Sports Communication here at Marist can lead that charge.
Yeah, 100%. Well, that's a great point, Barbara, because I think, if we look at these numbers and compare them to some of the polling we've done in the past, we have 26% of sports fans say that they follow the WNBA. Now, you may say, oh, that's only a quarter of sports fans. However, that number for NASCAR is 16%.
Wow.
When you compare it with polling that we did last year.
Wow.
For Major League Baseball, that number is 37%. NBA, 37%. The NBA or the NFL is the Goliath that comes in, I believe 56%. But the WNBA is not at the bottom of that. It's quite competitive, even when you look at the NBA and Major League Baseball.
Exactly.
And you look at, is the audience growing or is it shrinking? And I think we can see that for many of those audiences, those are shrinking audiences. For the WNBA, though, and for many of those other women's sports that we polled, it's growing. And so I think you're exactly right. It's, clinging to a smaller and smaller and graying group of fans for something like MLB and not embracing a younger group of fans. Now, the younger fans that may follow women's sports may not follow it in the same way. It may not be live game coverage. There may be other ways that they like engaging via social media and other ways. But I'll tell you, if you try to monetize that, I'm sure it can be done.
Well, this is all interesting. I think also you touched on and identified something which I know Barb reacted to, and I did as well, is the idea of it being 50 years since the passage of the Title IX. And it sounds like a polling topic to me, Barb. I don't know.
Yeah, what do you think, Jay?
You know what? If you guys want to work with me, I am sure we can come up with something. No, absolutely. I'm hoping that this is the kind of research that we can repeat and see how those fan attitudes are changing, in what direction when it comes to both men's and women's sports, because, it is a bit, it's a snapshot, right? And I want to see if these trends are continuing in the direction that we suspect.
Well, 2022 is a new year, and we will be back in the field with you undoubtedly, and we'll have you back on Poll Hub next time when we have some more data, because it seems like there's a lot more to poll about and a lot more to talk about. Jane McManus, Director for the Center for Sports Communication here at Marist. Thank you so much for joining us and being a partner in our polling.
Thanks for having me anytime.
Fun fact today could be women's sports for me, but it's Thanksgiving season, and we wanted to know what the poll data showed about people shopping on Thanksgiving or Black Friday or anywhere else.
Cyber Monday, that's the new one.
Yeah. Cyber Monday, yeah.
Even through the weekend.
Isn't there Giving Tuesday too, right? I think there's another one.
Yeah, I know something.
Yeah, that's if you forgot, that's if your gift shopping turned personal over the weekend with the good buys.
Yeah, anyway, so 2013, we saw some data from Hartford Current Poll, it's provided by the Roper Center in November, obviously, and whether people were going to shop online on Thanksgiving or Black Friday. Those were planning to shop broke exactly even, 47-47. Barbara, you did some more research on the recent data on this, suggesting that a lot of people are shopping on these days.
Well, it's interesting, but the National Retail Federation does a consumer holiday poll around this time of year to find out what to expect as the Thanksgiving holiday is certainly the kickoff for spending and thinking, holiday gifts. And it's a big retail weekend, but 66% of Americans plan on shopping this weekend. Now, granted, that's actually down from a pre-pandemic level in 2019, so it hasn't really rebounded completely from last year when people were very concerned about in-store purchases. But you mentioned in-store and online. 65% of people who plan to shop are actually planning to shop in store this weekend. So things haven't actually changed as much as we think perhaps it has been. I'm not sure there was a Cyber Monday in 2013. There may have been just a kind of a start.
There was, but people weren't asking questions in polls about it. So
yeah, and so that 47-47 split is actually pretty interesting because even now in 2021, although we do a lot of things online, shopping during the Thanksgiving weekend is not necessarily one of them.
No, you won't catch me in the lines. I'm not hitting out shopping. How about you, Jay?
No, I thought that's what was so interesting, is that's why I thought this was a fun fact, is that in 2013, Black Friday, were you shopping online 50-50, 47-47, but a 50-50 split. I was sure that the reaction would be, oh, well, that's turned upside down. Amazon owns everything now. And not true. That's what's so remarkable about this, is that in this most recent survey and in this year, I think this year, perhaps more than leading up to the pandemic, before the pandemic happened, we actually maybe want to get out and go to a shop. Maybe we don't want to spend all day in a mall, but we want to get out because we've spent the last 18 months shopping online and doing everything online.
So actually touch and feel and bump elbows.
Right. I thought that was what made this really interesting, as maybe not fun, but an interesting fact anyway. And interesting is fun to me. So whatever. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Cyber Monday. Happy Black Friday. Happy Giving Tuesday.
You've got them all.
Whatever. Happy birthday.
You're the marketer's dream. You've got it all down.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Ashley Marcinik and Marcello Bettman.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review. Positive reviews help other like-minded listeners find us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions, tweet them to us at Marist Poll.
Finally, however, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there's a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.